The first time Ethan Langston found rubber protection in his wife's gym bag, he told himself they were for the health class she taught part-time. The second time, he noticed they were the ribbed kind. Nothing like what they used in 15 years of marriage. The third time, there were only 2 left in a box of 12. That's when he knew his life was over. Not ended. Over. There's a difference. End is sudden. This was watching everything you'd built dissolve in slow motion while pretending not to notice. Ethan sat in his Honda Civic outside Natalie's CrossFit gym at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, watching his wife laugh at something Trevor Blackwell whispered in her ear. Her hand lingered on his chest, longer than necessary. Trevor's fingers traced her shoulder blade as she bent to tie her shoe. Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. Not from rage, from the terrible clarity that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. He drove home in silence, walked into their bedroom, and watched Natalie emerge from the shower 20 minutes later, humming some song he'd never heard before. "How was class?" he asked. "Fine," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Just the usual stuff." The usual stuff, like screwing another man while your husband graded 9th grade algebra tests at home. That night, lying beside her, Ethan stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would reshape everything. He wouldn't confront her. He wouldn't scream or throw things or demand explanations that would only bring more lies. He would wait, and he would remember everything, because sometimes the quietest man in the room is the most dangerous. "I've been thinking about us," Natalie said over breakfast, stirring her Greek yogurt with surgical precision. "About what we want." Grace, their 9-year-old daughter, looked up from her cereal. "Want for what?" "Nothing, sweetheart. Eat your breakfast." Ethan folded his newspaper, actual paper, not digital, because he liked the ritual of it. What kind of thinking? Modern couples are exploring different relationship models, non-monogamy, open marriages. She said it like she was discussing the weather. "I listened to this podcast." "Mom, what's non-monogamy?" Grace asked. "Nothing you need to worry about." Ethan's voice carried an edge he didn't recognize. "Grace, go brush your teeth. Bus comes in 10 minutes. After Grace left, Natalie leaned forward. "Don't shut me down, Ethan. I'm trying to have an adult conversation." "About what? Screwing other people?" She flinched at his language. "Good. About growing. About not being trapped in some 1950s ideal of marriage that doesn't work for anyone anymore. It was working fine for me." "That's the problem. You're content with fine." "I'm not." Ethan studied his wife's face. The slight upturn of her nose, the freckles that appeared every summer, the scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. He'd memorized these features during late-night feedings when Grace was a baby, during lazy Sunday mornings, during 1,000 quiet moments that apparently meant nothing to her. "What aren't you getting from me?" he asked. "It's not about what you're not giving. It's about what I'm not exploring." "With who?" "It's not about a specific person." "Bees." The word came out flat, matter of fact. "You don't suddenly develop philosophical interests in open marriage without someone in mind." Natalie's jaw tightened. "This is exactly why I can't talk to you. You make everything personal." "It is personal. We're married." "Maybe that's the problem." The words hung between them like smoke. Ethan folded his newspaper again, creasing the edges with mathematical precision. He taught algebra to teenagers, dealt with problems that had clear solutions, logical progressions from A to B to C. This felt like trying to solve an equation where someone kept changing the variables. "So, what are you asking for?" he said finally. "Permission to explore, to see what else is out there." "And if I say no," she shrugged, "then we'll have a bigger conversation about what kind of marriage this really is." Ethan drove to work that morning with Natalie's ultimatum echoing in his head. The autumn leaves were turning in Minneapolis, painting the suburbs in shades of gold and red that reminded him of the first time he'd seen Natalie, 17 years ago at a coffee shop near the University of Minnesota. She'd been reading Sylvia Plath, wearing a burgundy sweater that brought out the auburn in her hair. He'd worked up the courage to approach her by pretending to need help with a calculus problem he could solve in his sleep. She'd laughed at his transparent excuse, but agreed to coffee anyway. "You're different from the other math guys," she'd said. "Quieter, more thoughtful. Is that good or bad?" "It's interesting. Most people are so loud about everything. You actually listen." Now, apparently, his listening wasn't enough. She needed exploration, adventure, something he couldn't provide with his teacher's salary and his preference for quiet evenings at home. By the time he reached Jefferson High School, Ethan had made his decision. He would give Natalie what she wanted, not because he believed in it, but because he was curious to see how far she would go. Sometimes the best way to watch someone destroy themselves is to hand them the tools. The changes started small. Natalie bought new underwear, black lace instead of her usual cotton briefs. She joined a different gym, one across town with later hours. She started reading articles about ethical non-monogamy and leaving them open on her laptop. "It's important to establish boundaries," she explained to Ethan one evening, as if she were teaching him a lesson plan. "Clear communication. No overnight stays, no emotional attachment. And if you catch something, we'll use protection, regular testing, you know." It's actually safer than most people's approach to casual sex because there's more communication. Ethan nodded along, making mental notes. Every rule she laid out was a future broken promise. Every boundary was a line she would cross. He knew this with the same certainty he knew that x plus 5 equals 12 meant x equals sign 7. "What about Grace?" he asked. "She doesn't need to know the details. We're still her parents. This doesn't change that." But it did change things. Grace started asking questions. "Why does Mom go to the gym at night now? She likes the evening classes. Why doesn't she eat dinner with us anymore? She's trying a new schedule. Why does she smell different when she comes home?" That question hit Ethan like a physical blow. Children notice everything. They just don't always know what they're noticing. Natalie's new schedule meant leaving the house at 7 p.m. 3 nights a week. She'd return around 10:30, shower immediately, and slip into bed without speaking. On weekends, she started taking day trips to explore new neighborhoods, always alone. Ethan used those hours to search her laptop, her phone, her purse, her car. He found text messages with Shannon Del Rey, her best friend since college. "How's the experiment going?" Shannon had written. "Better than expected. Trevor is intense." And Ethan? Still playing the martyr, acting like he's doing me this huge favor by letting me explore. Maybe he actually loves you enough to try. Maybe. Or maybe he's just too passive to fight for what he wants. Ethan stared at that message for a long time. Too passive to fight. She wasn't wrong, exactly. He'd spent 15 years accommodating her needs, smoothing over conflicts, choosing peace over confrontation. But passivity and strategy could look very similar from the outside. Trevor Blackwell owned a CrossFit gym called Iron Temple. Ethan looked him up online. Divorced, no kids, the kind of perpetually shirtless social media presence that screamed midlife crisis. His Instagram was full of motivational quotes overlaid on pictures of his abs. "Pain is just weakness leaving the body. Champions aren't made in comfort zones. Take what you want and pay for it later." That last one felt like a prophecy. Ethan started showing up at school events where Trevor might appear. PTA meetings, fundraisers, Grace's soccer games when she played teams from Trevor's side of town. He watched how Trevor interacted with married women. The lingering handshakes, the unnecessary physical contact, the way he made each one feel like the most important person in the room. It was a practiced routine. Trevor had done this before. At Grace's Halloween party, Ethan watched Trevor corner Natalie by the punch bowl. She threw her head back, laughing at something he said, her hand resting on his forearm. When she looked around and caught Ethan watching, her smile faltered for just a moment. "Having fun?" Ethan asked, appearing beside them. "Trevor was just telling me about his new workout program," Natalie said. "It's specifically designed for women over 30. "Sounds intense," Ethan said. Trevor grinned. "Natalie can handle intense. She's stronger than she looks." "Yes," Ethan said, meeting his eyes. "She is." That night, after Grace was asleep, Ethan asked Natalie directly, "Are you sleeping with him?" She was brushing her teeth, her back to him in the bathroom mirror. "Who?" "Trevor." She spit into the sink, rinsed, wiped her mouth with careful precision. "I'm exploring connections with several people. Trevor is one of them." "Several people?" "The whole point of this arrangement is not to put all my emotional eggs in one basket. I thought it wasn't supposed to be emotional." "It's not. But there's different kinds of connection, Ethan. Physical, intellectual, spiritual. You can't reduce human relationships to just screwing." "But she could reduce their marriage to it, apparently." "Are you using protection?" "Of course." Every time, she turned to face him, toothbrush still in her hand. "What kind of question is that? The kind a husband asks when his wife is screwing strangers?" "They're not strangers. And this was your choice, too." "No, it wasn't. You presented me with an ultimatum. That's not choice." "You could have said no." "And then what? You would have stopped wanting other people?" You would have magically become satisfied with our marriage? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. At least, you're honest about that. December brought the first real snow and Natalie's first lie that Ethan could prove. She claimed to be at a weekend workshop for school counselors in Duluth. Ethan called the hotel she'd supposedly booked. No reservation under her name. He drove past Trevor's gym on Saturday morning and saw her car in the parking lot. They were getting sloppy. Or maybe Natalie just didn't care anymore about maintaining the illusion. That Sunday, while Natalie was still in Duluth, Ethan took Grace ice skating at the outdoor rink downtown. She was getting better, more confident on the blades, but she kept looking over at the parking lot. Dad, is Mom really at a work thing? Ethan helped her adjust her helmet. Why do you ask? Jenny's mom saw her at Target yesterday, but you said she was in Duluth. Jenny lived 3 blocks away. Natalie had been spotted 20 minutes from their house while supposedly 2 hours north. Maybe Jenny's mom was mistaken, Ethan said. Maybe. But Grace was 9, not stupid. She was starting to notice the inconsistencies, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, the tension that followed her mother around like a shadow. That night, Natalie returned with a story about keynote speakers and networking sessions. She even had a conference bag and some pamphlets she'd obviously grabbed from her school's guidance office. How was Duluth? Ethan asked. Cold, but productive. I learned a lot about trauma-informed counseling approaches. She was a good liar. Not great, but good enough to maintain plausible deniability. Ethan wondered how long she'd been practicing. Grace and I went ice skating. She's really improving. That's nice. Natalie was already walking toward the bedroom, her weekend bag slung over her shoulder. I'm exhausted. Long drive back. I bet. She paused at the doorway. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Just that driving can be tiring. She studied his face for a moment, then continued upstairs. Ethan waited until he heard the shower running, then checked her phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. 17 missed calls from Trevor. 12 text messages. Where did you go? You just disappeared? I thought we were having dinner. Call me back. Seriously, what the hell? If this is some kind of game, the last message had been sent an hour ago. Your husband called my gym looking for you. We need to talk. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd never called Trevor's gym, which meant Trevor was lying to Natalie, trying to create drama or test her loyalty. Or maybe he was getting paranoid, sensing that his perfect setup was about to collapse. Either way, it was information Ethan could use. He deleted his own number from Natalie's phone log just in case she checked. Then he went upstairs and pretended to be asleep when she came to bed. 3 days later, Natalie fainted during her morning jog. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Natalie lay on a gurney behind a thin curtain, her face pale and drawn. Grace sat in the waiting area with a coloring book, occasionally glancing up at the TV mounted in the corner. Mrs. Langston? The doctor was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I'm Dr. Martinez. How are you feeling? Better, just dizzy. I probably didn't eat enough before my run. We'd like to run some tests. Blood work, urine sample, basic metabolic panel, make sure everything's functioning normally. Natalie glanced at Ethan. Is that necessary? It's standard procedure for unexplained fainting episodes, Dr. Martinez said. Better safe than sorry. Of course, Ethan said. Whatever you recommend. The tests took 2 hours. Grace finished her coloring book and started on the word search puzzles Ethan kept in his wallet for emergencies. Natalie dozed fitfully on the gurney, waking every few minutes to check her phone. When Dr. Martinez returned, his expression was more serious. Mrs. Langston, we found some abnormalities in your blood work. Your white blood cell count is elevated, and there are some other markers that suggest an infection. What kind of infection? We'll need to run more specific tests to determine that, but I'd like to start you on antibiotics as a precaution. And we should schedule a follow-up in a few days. Natalie sat up straighter. What aren't you telling me? Some of the markers suggest a sexually transmitted infection. It's important that we identify the specific pathogen so we can treat it appropriately. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace looked up from her puzzle, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Dad, is Mom sick? The doctors are going to help her feel better, Ethan said, his voice steady. But his hands were shaking again. Not from shock this time. From vindication. Every late night, every lie, every casual dismissal of his concerns had led to this moment. Natalie's exploration had consequences. And now they were sitting in an emergency room, watching those consequences unfold in real time. I need to make a phone call, Natalie said. Of course. Take your time. Ethan watched her walk toward the hospital's main entrance, her phone already pressed to her ear. Through the glass doors, he could see her pacing, gesturing frantically, calling Trevor, probably, or Shannon, someone who could help her figure out how to manage this crisis, how to minimize the damage to her carefully constructed narrative. But some damage can't be minimized. Some mistakes compound, gathering interest like a debt that can never be repaid. Ethan pulled out his own phone and called his sister in Chicago. Lisa, it's me. I need a favor. The official diagnosis came back 3 days later. Chlamydia and gonorrhea, both in advanced stages. Natalie had been carrying the infections for months, maybe longer. Left untreated, they could cause serious complications. Infertility, chronic pain, systemic illness. The good news is they're both treatable with antibiotics, Dr. Martinez explained during their follow-up appointment. But we need to test all recent sexual partners and make sure they receive treatment too. Natalie shifted uncomfortably. How recent? Ideally, anyone from the past 6 months, possibly longer, depending on when you first contracted the infections. Ethan felt his wife's eyes on him, but he kept his gaze fixed on the doctor. And we'll need to retest you in 3 months to make sure the treatment was effective. In the meantime, no unprotected sexual contact with anyone. After the appointment, they sat in Ethan's Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot. The December wind rattled the windows. You need to get tested too, Natalie said finally. I know. Ethan, don't. You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to apologize or explain or ask me to understand how this happened. He turned to look at her for the first time since leaving the doctor's office. I don't want to hear any of it. So what do we do now? You get better. You tell your partners they need to get tested, and we figure out what's left of our marriage. Is there anything left? Ethan started the engine. That's up to you. But he was lying. It wasn't up to her anymore. For the first time in their marriage, Natalie wasn't in control of the narrative. She'd made choices that had consequences she couldn't manipulate or manage away, and Ethan was going to make sure she faced every single one of them. That evening, while Natalie slept off the side effects of her antibiotics, Ethan sat in his home office and opened a new browser window in incognito mode. He researched divorce attorneys, child custody laws, and the legal implications of infidelity in Minnesota. He also researched something else, the criminal penalties for knowingly transmitting sexually transmitted infections. Because if Natalie had known she was infected and continued having unprotected sex with multiple partners, she hadn't just betrayed her marriage vows, she'd committed a felony. Grace noticed the change first. Mom looks different, she said over breakfast 2 weeks later. Natalie had lost weight, her face gaunt and tired. The antibiotics were working, but the stress was taking its own toll. She's been sick, sweetheart. She's getting better. Is she going to die? The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. No, honey, Mom's going to be fine. But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure they were true. Natalie's symptoms were getting worse, not better. The fatigue was constant now, and she'd developed a persistent cough that kept her awake at night. Dr. Martinez had ordered more tests. Sometimes these infections can be more complicated than they initially appeared, he'd explained. We want to make sure we're not missing anything. The results came back on a Friday afternoon. Ethan was in his classroom, staying late to grade semester exams, when his phone rang. Mr. Langston, this is Dr. Martinez. Is your wife with you? No, she's at home. Why? I need to speak with both of you as soon as possible. Can you come in this evening? What's wrong? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Ethan's hands were shaking again as he packed up his papers. He'd been expecting bad news for weeks, but the reality of it still felt like a punch to the gut. He found Natalie in the living room, curled up on the couch under a blanket, watching Netflix. She looked up when he entered, and he could see the fear in her eyes. The doctor called, he said. She muted the TV. What did he say? He wants to see us tonight. Both of us. They drove to the hospital in silence. Grace was at Shannon's house for a sleepover. A small mercy that meant they could have this conversation without managing her questions and fears. Dr. Martinez met them in his office this time, not an exam room. His desk was cluttered with medical journals and family photos. On the wall behind him hung his diplomas and certifications. proof of his expertise in delivering news that changed lives. Mrs. Langston, I'm afraid the additional tests revealed something more serious than we initially thought. Natalie gripped Ethan's hand. What is it? You've tested positive for HIV. The words seemed to hang in the air, incomprehensible. Ethan felt Natalie's hand go limp in his. That's not possible, she whispered. I understand this is shocking, but the test results are clear. You're HIV positive, and based on your T-cell count and viral load, it appears you've been infected for some time, possibly a year or more. But I was careful. We used protection most of the time. Most of the time. Ethan filed that information away with everything else he was learning about his wife's secret life. HIV can be transmitted even with barrier protection, especially if there are other STIs present that cause lesions or inflammation. The chlamydia and gonorrhea would have made transmission more likely. Dr. Martinez explained treatment options, life expectancy, transmission risks. His voice was clinical, professional, kind. But Ethan heard it all through a filter of white noise. His wife was going to die. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday, sooner than either of them had expected. And she was going to die because she'd chosen to screw a stranger who hadn't bothered to get tested. We'll need to test you as well, Mr. Langston, the doctor was saying, and we'll need to contact all of Mrs. Langston's recent sexual partners. How recent? Ethan asked. Anyone from the past 2 years, minimum. HIV can remain dormant for extended periods. 2 years. Natalie had been cheating for 2 years, not just the few months since her open marriage conversation. I'll need a list of names and contact information, Dr. Martinez continued. This is a public health issue now. Anyone who's been exposed needs to be notified and tested. Natalie was crying quietly, her face buried in her hands. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that felt both automatic and foreign. What about our daughter? He asked. HIV isn't transmitted through casual contact. Grace isn't at risk, but we'll want to monitor your wife's health closely, and there will be precautions to take it home. They left the hospital with a bag full of pamphlets and prescription bottles. Natalie didn't speak during the drive home. Ethan found himself thinking about practical things, insurance coverage, work schedules, how to explain Mommy's new medicine routine to Grace. It wasn't until they were sitting in their driveway that the full weight of the situation hit him. I'm sorry, Natalie said, her voice barely audible. I know. I never meant for this to happen. I know that too. Do you hate me? Ethan turned to look at her, really look at her, maybe for the first time in months. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The woman who'd confidently explained the benefits of ethical non-monogamy was gone, replaced by someone who was finally understanding the true cost of her choices. No, he said, I don't hate you. It was the truth. Hate required passion, energy, emotional investment. What Ethan felt was something colder, more final. He felt nothing at all. The next 3 months passed in a blur of medical appointments, medication schedules, and carefully managed conversations. Grace knew her mother was sick, but not why. The school knew Ethan might need to take unexpected leave, but not the details. Shannon knew everything. She showed up the day after the diagnosis with casseroles and unsolicited advice about staying positive and fighting the disease together. HIV isn't a capital punishment anymore, she told Ethan while Natalie napped upstairs. With proper treatment, people live normal lifespans. Normal, Ethan repeated. You know what I mean. You can get through this. Can we? Shannon studied his face. You're angry. Yes, that's understandable, but anger won't help Natalie get better. Nothing I do will help Natalie get better. She has an incurable disease that she got from cheating on me for 2 years. She made a mistake, multiple mistakes, over multiple years, with multiple partners. Ethan's voice was still quiet, but something in his tone made Shannon step back. She didn't slip and fall into someone else's bed, Shannon. She made a series of deliberate choices, and now we're all living with the consequences. She's still your wife. Is she? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she stopped being my wife a long time ago. I just didn't get the memo. That evening, Ethan sat in his office and made a series of phone calls. First to his sister Lisa, explaining the situation and asking if Grace could spend part of the summer with her in Chicago. Then to a divorce attorney named Margaret Stern, whose name he'd found through an online search. I'd like to schedule a consultation, he told her voicemail. It's regarding divorce proceedings in a case involving infidelity and communicable disease transmission. He also called Trevor's gym. Iron Temple, this is Marcus. Hi, I'm trying to reach Trevor Blackwell. It's regarding a health matter. He's not here right now. Can I take a message? Could you tell him that Ethan Langston called? It's about Natalie. He'll know what it's regarding. Ethan hung up and sat back in his chair. He wasn't sure if Trevor had been tested yet or if he even knew about Natalie's diagnosis. But he would soon. And then Ethan would see what kind of man Trevor really was when the consequences caught up with him. The call came 2 days later. Ethan was at school between classes when his phone buzzed. "This is Ethan! You Trevor's voice was shaking with rage. "What the hell did you do? I didn't do anything. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb." The health department called me. They want me to come in for testing because of some STD exposure. They said it was reported by someone named Langston. That would be my wife. She's required by law to notify her sexual partners when she's diagnosed with a communicable disease. Bees. She said she was clean. We both got tested in September. When did you last have unprotected sex with her? The silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought Trevor had hung up. Trevor? October, maybe November. She was diagnosed in December. So either she was already infected in September and the test was wrong, or she got infected between September and December. Either way, you've been exposed. Jesus Christ! What does she have? Ethan could have drawn this out, made him sweat, enjoyed the moment. Instead, he delivered the news with the same clinical detachment he used to explain algebraic equations. HIV. The phone went dead. Margaret Stern's office was in downtown Minneapolis, on the 20th floor of a glass tower that overlooked the Mississippi River. She was in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. "Tell me about your situation, Mr. Langston." Ethan laid out the timeline methodically, the open marriage conversation, the lies, the diagnosis, the 2-year history of infidelity that had only recently come to light. "Do you have documentation of any of this?" "Some. Text messages between my wife and her friend, medical records showing the diagnosis and timeline, evidence of her lies about work trips and other activities." "What are you hoping to achieve?" "Full custody of my daughter, an equitable division of assets that reflects my wife's actions, and I want to make sure she can't rewrite the narrative later." Margaret made notes on a legal pad. Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state, which means infidelity doesn't automatically affect property division or custody decisions. However, there are exceptions when one spouse's actions have financially damaged the family or put the children at risk. HIV medical bills aren't going to be cheap. No, they're not. And if you can prove that your wife concealed her risky behavior while exposing you to financial liability, that could be relevant to asset division. What about custody? That's more complex. Courts prioritize the best interests of the child, and they don't generally view infidelity as grounds for limiting parental rights unless it directly endangered the child. She brought a deadly disease into our home. HIV isn't casually transmitted and she's receiving treatment. A judge would need to see evidence that her condition or behavior poses a direct threat to your daughter's well-being. Ethan thought about Grace's questions, her confusion, the way she'd started to withdraw from her mother over the past few months. She's been lying to our daughter for 2 years. Grace doesn't trust her anymore. That's more promising. We can document the psychological impact of the deception and instability. Children need consistency and honesty. They talked for another hour about strategy, timelines, and costs. Margaret's retainer was $5,000, money Ethan would have to borrow from his retirement account. But it was an investment in Grace's future and in his own. When he left her office, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. For the first time since this nightmare began, he was taking action instead of just reacting. He was done being passive. Spring came early that year. By March, the snow had melted and Grace was back to playing soccer in the backyard. Natalie's health had stabilized. The medications were working, her viral load was undetectable, and she'd regained some of her strength. But their marriage was dying by degrees. They slept in separate bedrooms now, officially because of Natalie's night sweats and insomnia, but really because Ethan couldn't bear to lie next to her anymore. They ate dinner together for Grace's sake, but spoke only in logistical shorthand. Who was picking up Grace from school? Whether they needed milk from the store, when the next doctor's appointment was scheduled. Natalie tried to bridge the gap a few times. "I've been thinking about counseling," she said one evening after Grace had gone to bed. "For us. I think it could help." "Help with what?" "Communication, trust, moving forward together." "I don't want to move forward together," She flinched as if he'd slapped her. What does that mean? It means I'm done pretending this marriage can be saved. Ethan, you cheated on me for 2 years. You lied about it. You exposed both of us to life-threatening diseases. You involved our daughter in your deception. His voice remained calm, conversational. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix? I made mistakes. You made choices. Every single day for 2 years, you chose to lie to me and screw other people. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. Natalie started crying, the kind of soft, manipulative tears that had worked on him for 15 years. This time, Ethan felt nothing. I want a divorce, he said. What about Grace? Grace will be fine. Kids adapt to divorce. They don't adapt to living in a house full of lies and resentment. She needs her mother. She needs a mother she can trust. I'm not sure that's you anymore. That night, Natalie called Shannon, and their conversation carried through the thin walls of their colonial house. Ethan listened from his office as she sobbed about his cruelty, his unwillingness to forgive, his lack of compassion for her suffering. He's punishing me, she said. I'm sick, and he's punishing me instead of supporting me. Shannon's voice was muffled, but Ethan caught fragments. Understand his anger, and need to give him time, and not the same man you married. She was right about that last part. The man Natalie had married would have absorbed this betrayal, internalized it, found ways to blame himself for her choices. He would have gone to counseling and pretended to heal while she continued to rewrite history in her favor. But that man was gone. He died in a hospital room in December, listening to a doctor explain how his wife had contracted a deadly disease from a stranger. What remained was someone harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who remembered everything. The process server found Natalie at her part-time job at Lincoln Elementary, delivering the divorce papers in front of her colleagues and several parents. Ethan hadn't planned the public humiliation. Margaret had simply arranged service for when Natalie would be easy to locate, but he didn't feel bad about it either. That evening, Natalie stormed into the house with the papers clutched in her hand. You fool, you actually did it. Grace looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her eyes wide. Dad, what's wrong with Mom? Nothing, sweetheart. Mom and I need to have a conversation. Can you go upstairs and work on your homework? I am working on my homework. In your room, please. Grace gathered her books with exaggerated slowness, clearly hoping to overhear whatever was about to happen. Ethan waited until he heard her bedroom door close. You didn't have to embarrass me at work, Natalie said. I didn't choose where you got served. That was the process server's decision. Bees. You could have had them delivered here. And you could have not screwed half the city while married to me. We don't always get what we want. Natalie threw the papers on the counter. What do you want, Ethan? Money. The house. You want to destroy me completely? I want what's fair. Fair? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think any of this is fair? I'm sick. I might die. And instead of supporting me, you're putting me through a divorce. You're not going to die. Your viral load is undetectable. You don't know that. The medications might stop working. I might develop resistance. Then you should have thought about that before you started screwing strangers without protection. The words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking older than her 35 years. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, and now we both have to live with the consequences. Oh, what about Grace? You're going to take her away from me? I'm asking for primary custody. You'll have visitation rights. Primary custody! She repeated the words like she was learning a foreign language. Based on what? Based on the fact that you've been lying to our daughter for 2 years. Based on the fact that you brought a communicable disease into our home. Based on the fact that you've demonstrated a pattern of reckless decision-making that puts our family at risk. I've never put Grace at risk. You put our entire family at risk the moment you decided to have unprotected sex with multiple partners. Grace lives in this house too. She sees everything, even when you think she doesn't. Natalie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more defeated. What do you want me to do? Beg? Grovel? Tell you I'll do anything to save our marriage? I want you to sign the papers and make this as easy as possible for Grace. And if I don't? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot he'd taken months earlier. One of her text messages. To Shannon, Sometimes I wish Ethan would just disappear. I want my daughter to know a real man. Natalie's face went white. Where did you get that? Your phone. You left it charging downstairs after one of your workshops in Duluth. You went through my phone? You went through half the men in Minneapolis. I think snooping through your text messages is the least of our marital violations. She stared at the screenshot for a long time. You saved that. I saved everything. Every lie, every text message, every inconsistency in your stories. I've been documenting your behavior for months. Why? Because I knew this day would come. I knew that eventually your choices would have consequences, and I wanted to be prepared. Natalie stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, their neighbor was mowing his lawn, living a normal life in a normal marriage with normal problems. You've been planning this since December? I've been planning this since the day you told me you wanted an open marriage. I just didn't know what form it would take. Jesus, Ethan, who are you? It was a good question. 6 months ago, he would have said he was a high school math teacher who liked quiet evenings and crossword puzzles. A devoted husband and father who avoided conflict and preferred compromise to confrontation. Now he wasn't sure. The man who had spent months methodically documenting his wife's infidelity, who had researched divorce law and criminal statutes, who had calculated the precise moment to file papers for maximum impact. That man was a stranger even to himself. I'm someone who learns from his mistakes, he said finally. And my biggest mistake was trusting you for 15 years. Summer brought a routine of shuttling Grace between houses. The divorce was proceeding slowly, with Natalie's attorney fighting every provision while her health continued to decline. The HIV medications were causing side effects, nausea, fatigue, mood swings that made her unpredictable around Grace. Ethan had moved into a small apartment across town, taking only his clothes and personal belongings. He left Natalie in the house they'd bought together, partly out of practicality and partly because he wanted her to have to face the memories alone. Grace adapted to the new arrangement with the resilience of childhood, but Ethan could see the toll it was taking. She was quieter, more anxious, prone to stomach aches that had no medical explanation. Is Mom going to be okay? She asked one evening as Ethan tucked her into the twin bed in his apartment's spare room. The doctors say she's responding well to treatment. But she looks so sad all the time. Divorce is hard on everyone, sweetheart. But it doesn't change how much Mom and I love you. Why did you and Mom stop loving each other? The question hung in the air like smoke. Ethan could tell her the truth, that her mother had been unfaithful, had lied for years, had brought disease into their home. He could explain betrayal and consequence, and the way trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Instead, he said, sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes they want different things out of life. Did Mom want to not be married anymore? In a way, yes. Did you? No, but I wanted Mom to be honest with me, and she couldn't do that. Grace processed this with the serious expression she wore when working through difficult math problems. Are you going to marry someone else? I don't know. Maybe someday. Would that be okay with you? I guess, as long as she's nice to me. Anyone I marry would have to pass the Grace test first. She smiled at that, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her in weeks. That night, after Grace fell asleep, Ethan sat in his kitchen and opened his laptop. He'd been working on something for months, a detailed timeline of Natalie's infidelity, complete with dates, locations, and evidence. Bank records showing charges at hotels and restaurants during her supposed work trips. Phone records showing late-night calls to numbers registered to Trevor and 2 other men. Medical records establishing the timeline of her infections. It was more than enough for the divorce proceedings. Margaret had called it nuclear-grade documentation and warned him that using all of it might seem excessive to a judge. But Ethan wasn't just preparing for divorce court. He was preparing for the rest of his life. For the day when Grace was old enough to ask harder questions about why her parents' marriage had ended. He was preparing for the inevitable attempts to rewrite history, to paint him as the villain in a story where he'd been nothing but collateral damage. Most of all, he was preparing his own peace of mind. Every fact documented, every lie exposed, every consequence traced back to its source. It was his way of making sense of the senseless, of finding order in the chaos Natalie had created. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Trevor. We need to talk. Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He had nothing to say to Trevor Blackwell. The man had been a symptom, not the disease. But 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Don't hang up, Trevor said when Ethan answered. I know you don't want to talk to me, but we have a situation. What situation? I tested positive, HIV positive, and my lawyer says I might have grounds to sue your wife for not disclosing her status. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. When were you tested? Last month. I've been putting it off, hoping the initial test was wrong. But it wasn't. I'm sorry. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your wife infected me with a fatal disease and then let me walk around for months, not knowing it. HIV isn't fatal anymore. Bees. It's manageable, maybe, but it's still a life sentence. And I got it because your wife lied to me about being clean. Ethan found himself in the strange position of defending Natalie to her lover. She might not have known she was infected when you were together. She knew she was screwing multiple people without protection. She knew she was taking risks. And she didn't tell me. What do you want from me? I want to know if you'll testify against her in a civil lawsuit, maybe even criminal charges. The request caught Ethan off guard. He'd been so focused on the divorce proceedings that he hadn't considered the possibility of Natalie facing criminal liability for disease transmission. I'll have to think about it. Don't think too long. My lawyer says the statute of limitations is short for this kind of thing. After Trevor hung up, Ethan sat in his quiet apartment and considered the implications. Testifying against Natalie in a criminal case would be devastating to her, to Grace, to any possibility of maintaining a civil co-parenting relationship. It would also be justice. The call from Margaret Stern came on a Wednesday morning in late July. We have a problem, she said without preamble. Natalie's attorney filed a motion alleging that you've been stalking and maltreating her. That's ridiculous. They have evidence that you've been driving past the house at odd hours, following her to medical appointments, confronting her sexual partners. Ethan's mind raced. He had driven past the house a few times, checking to make sure Grace was okay during Natalie's custody periods. He had seen Natalie at the hospital during one of his own medical appointments, and Trevor had called him, not the other way around. It's all circumstantial. Maybe, but it's enough to make you look vindictive and unstable. They're asking for a restraining order and supervised visitation with Grace. Can they do that? If a judge believes you pose a threat, yes. We need to be very careful about how we respond to this. What are you recommending? Full transparency. Provide documentation for every interaction, every communication, every time you've been in the same place as your wife. Show that your behavior has been reasonable and justified. And if that's not enough, then we might need to consider a settlement that's more favorable to Natalie than either of us would like. After the call, Ethan sat in his classroom. Summer. School was in session and tried to process this latest development. Natalie was painting herself as the sufferer, using his quiet investigation of her behavior as evidence of his instability. It was brilliant in a way. Sociopathic, but brilliant. That evening, he called his sister Lisa. I need Grace to stay with you for a few weeks, he said. Things are getting complicated here. How complicated? Natalie's trying to paint me as dangerous. I don't want Grace caught in the middle of whatever happens next. Jesus, Ethan, what's happening to you? It was the second time in recent months that someone had asked him that question, and he still didn't have a good answer. I'm protecting my daughter, he said, and I'm making sure the truth doesn't get buried under a pile of lies. That doesn't sound like you. The old me would have rolled over and taken whatever Natalie dished out. The old me would have prioritized peace over justice. And the new you? The new me learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to stop being nice. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Grace can stay as long as you need. But Ethan, be careful. This kind of anger can eat you alive. I'm not angry anymore. What are you then? Ethan looked out the window of his apartment at the city lights of Minneapolis, thinking about his wife dying slowly in the house they'd shared, about Trevor, Blackwell facing a lifetime of medical bills and shortened life expectancy, about the dozen other people who might have been exposed to HIV through Natalie's reckless behavior. I'm efficient, he said. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-August. Ethan sat beside Margaret in the sterile courthouse conference room, watching Natalie and her attorney review their arguments. Natalie looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The HIV medications were taking their toll, and the stress of the divorce wasn't helping. For a moment, Ethan felt something that might have been sympathy. Then, he remembered the text message about wanting him to disappear, and the feeling passed. "Your Honor," Natalie's attorney began, "my client has been subjected to months of maltreatment and stalking by her estranged husband. He's followed her to medical appointments, confronted her associates, and engaged in surveillance of her residence." "Mr. Langston," the judge said, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Margaret stood. "Your Honor, my client has engaged in no behavior that could reasonably be considered stalking or maltreatment. The evidence shows that each alleged incident has an innocent explanation." She presented Ethan's documentation methodically. Time-stamped photos showing his location during disputed incidents. Phone records proving he hadn't initiated contact with Trevor, bank records showing legitimate reasons for being in areas where Natalie claimed he was following her. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "Mrs. Langston has failed to disclose the context of these alleged incidents. My client discovered that his wife had been engaging in extramarital affairs for over 2 years, during which time she contracted and transmitted multiple sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. Natalie's attorney objected, but the judge allowed Margaret to continue. "Mr. Langston's behavior, while perhaps unusual, represents the reasonable actions of a man discovering extensive marital fraud and attempting to protect his financial and parental interests." The hearing lasted 3 hours. Witnesses were called, evidence was presented, and arguments were made. In the end, the judge denied the restraining order but issued a warning to both parties about maintaining appropriate boundaries. As they left the courthouse, Natalie caught up with Ethan in the parking lot. "You're destroying me," she said. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just refusing to help you clean up the mess." "I'm sick, Ethan. I'm dying." "No, you're not. Your viral load is undetectable. You could live for decades with proper treatment. You don't know that. I know that you made choices that have consequences, and I know that you're trying to avoid those consequences by playing the sufferer. What do you want from me? What will it take for you to stop this?" Ethan considered the question. What did he want? Financial security for Grace? Full custody? Public acknowledgement of Natalie's betrayal? Or did he want something deeper? Some kind of existential justice that could never be achieved through legal proceedings? "I want you to take responsibility," he said finally. "Not just for the affairs, but for the lies, the manipulation, the way you've tried to rewrite history to make yourself the sufferer. I have taken responsibility. I've apologized. You've apologized for getting caught. You've never apologized for the choice to betray our marriage in the first place. I'm apologizing now. No, you're trying to manipulate me into dropping the divorce proceedings. There's a difference." Natalie stared at him for a long moment as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You've changed," she said. "Yes. I don't recognize you anymore." "Good. The man you married was too trusting, too willing to believe your lies. That man is gone." "And what's left?" Ethan got into his car without answering, but as he drove away, he found himself thinking about her question. What was left of the man he'd been? The devoted husband? The compromising father? The teacher who believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption? Maybe nothing. Maybe that man had been too naive to survive in a world where people like Natalie could smile and lie and destroy everything you'd built together while claiming to love you. Or maybe what was left was something harder but more honest. A man who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction. Either way, there was no going back. Fall brought new routines. Grace started 4th grade and seemed to be adjusting well to the custody schedule. She spent weekdays with Ethan and weekends with Natalie, an arrangement that gave her stability while acknowledging Natalie's declining health. The divorce was moving toward finalization. Margaret had negotiated a settlement that gave Ethan primary custody and an equitable division of assets, while ensuring that Natalie would have ongoing medical coverage and financial support. "She's agreed to everything," Margaret told him during their final meeting. "No contests, no appeals. She just wants it over." "Why the change of heart?" "I think she's tired, and I think she knows she's lucky you didn't pursue criminal charges." Trevor Blackwell had filed a civil lawsuit against Natalie for willful transmission of HIV. The case was still pending, but her insurance company was already discussing settlement options. Criminal charges were still possible. The district attorney was reviewing the case, but Trevor's cooperation would be crucial for prosecution. Ethan had been contacted by the prosecutor's office but hadn't decided whether to cooperate. Testifying against Natalie would feel like kicking someone who was already down. On the other hand, it would ensure that there were real consequences for her actions, not just the inconvenience of divorce proceedings. He was still weighing his options when Shannon Del Rey called. "We need to talk," she said. They met at a coffee shop near the university, neutral territory where neither of them had history. Shannon looked older than her 36 years, stress lines etched around her eyes. "Natalie's getting worse," she said without preamble. "Worse how?" "The medications aren't working as well as they hoped. Her viral load is climbing again, and she's developed some kind of resistance to the standard treatment protocol." Ethan felt his stomach clench. "What does that mean?" "It means she might not have as much time as we thought." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that information settling between them. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan asked. "Because she's too proud to tell you herself, and because Grace deserves to know that her mother is dying." The doctors were optimistic. "They're not optimistic anymore." Shannon leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "She has maybe a year, 18 months if she's lucky." "Does Grace know?" "No, Natalie doesn't want to scare her. Or she doesn't want to face the reality of what she's done." Shannon's expression hardened. "She made a mistake." "Stop." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't call it a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. What Natalie did was deliberate, repeated, and selfish. The fact that she's dying doesn't change that. She's still Grace's mother. Yes. And Grace deserves to know the truth about her mother. All of it. Not just the sanitized version Natalie wants to leave behind. You're really going to make a dying woman pay for her mistakes forever?" Ethan considered the question. Was he making Natalie pay? Or was he simply refusing to help her avoid payment? "I'm not making her do anything," he said finally. "I'm just not helping her escape the consequences of her choices. Even if those consequences include dying alone." "She's not dying alone. She has you, her sister, her medical team. She has Grace on weekends. She doesn't have her husband." "No, she doesn't. Because she chose to destroy her marriage rather than work on it." Shannon stared at him for a long moment. "I don't recognize you anymore, Ethan. You used to be kind." "I used to be naive. There's a difference." After Shannon left, Ethan sat alone in the coffee shop and tried to process what he'd learned. Natalie was dying. Really dying. Not just living with a manageable chronic condition. Part of him felt relief. If she died, the custody battle would be over. The financial complications would be simplified, and Grace would be spared years of confusion about her mother's dual nature. Another part of him felt something darker. Satisfaction that Natalie would face the ultimate consequence of her choices, that there would be a final accounting she couldn't manipulate or escape. And a small part of him, buried deep but still present, felt grief for the woman he'd loved for 15 years, who was disappearing by degrees into someone he didn't recognize. That evening, he called Grace at Natalie's house. "How's Mom doing, sweetheart?" "She's tired a lot, and she cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not watching." "Are you okay? Do you want to come stay with me tonight?" "No, I'm okay. Dad?" "Yeah. Is Mom going to get better?" Ethan closed his eyes. Another lie would be so easy, would buy them more time, would spare Grace the knowledge that her mother was dying. But Grace deserved the truth, even when it was painful. "I don't know, sweetheart. The doctors are working very hard to help her, but sometimes people don't get better, even when everyone tries their best." "Like Grandpa?" Ethan's father had died of cancer when Grace was 6. She'd been too young to understand the details, but she'd grasped the finality of it. Something like that. "Will you take care of me if Mom dies?" "Of course. No matter what happens, you'll always have me." "Promise?" "I promise." After the call, Ethan sat in his apartment and wondered if he was doing the right thing. Grace would be devastated when Natalie died. Would it be kinder to reconcile, to let her spend her mother's final months believing in the fairy tale of a happy family? Or would that just be another lie? Another layer of deception that would have to be unraveled later? He thought about the text message he'd saved, the one where Natalie had wished he would disappear. Even facing end, she hadn't apologized for that sentiment. She was sorry for getting sick, sorry for getting caught, sorry for the inconvenience her choices had caused. But she wasn't sorry for the choices themselves. And that made all the difference. October brought the first snow and the final court date. The divorce would be official within 30 days, ending a marriage that had been over in all but name for almost a year. Ethan and Natalie sat in the courtroom with their attorneys, not speaking, not looking at each other. She was wearing the blue dress she'd worn to their wedding 15 years earlier, though it hung loose on her diminished frame. The court finds that the marriage of Ethan and Natalie Langston is irretrievably broken, the judge announced. The divorce is granted. Just like that, it was over. 15 years of marriage, dissolved with a few sentences from a stranger in a black robe. They signed the final papers in silence. Natalie's signature was shaky, less confident than it had been in previous hearings. Her hands trembled as she gathered her purse and coat. "Ethan," she said as they left the courtroom. He turned, expecting another plea for reconciliation or forgiveness. Instead, she said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not taking Grace away completely, for letting me have weekends. She's your daughter, too." "Yes, but you could have made it so I never saw her again, given everything that happened." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of responsibility he'd heard from her in a year. "I never wanted to hurt Grace," he said. "I know, and I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did." "Yes, I did." They stood in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by other people's legal dramas, other families being torn apart by choices and circumstances. "I'm sorry," Natalie said, "for all of it. For the lying, the cheating, for destroying our family. I'm sorry." Ethan studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated remorse, but all he saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. "I know," he said. "Do you forgive me?" It was the question he'd been dreading, the one that had no good answer. Forgiveness would feel like betrayal of his own pain, of the months of lies and humiliation. But holding on to anger felt like poison he'd be carrying forever. "I'm trying to," he said finally. It was the most honest answer he could give. November brought Thanksgiving and a custody negotiation. Grace wanted to spend the holiday with both parents, an impossibility given the circumstances. "We could do it together," Natalie suggested during one of their brief conversations. "For Grace, just this once." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, Ethan, it might be my last Thanksgiving with her." The words hit him like a physical blow. Shannon had been right. Natalie was declining rapidly. She'd lost more weight, her color was gray, and she moved like someone whose bones hurt. "Okay," he said, "but at my apartment, and we keep it about Grace." Thanksgiving dinner was surreal. Ethan cooked turkey and stuffing while Natalie sat at the table, too weak to help, but trying to maintain conversation with Grace. They talked about school, about Grace's soccer team, about anything except the obvious tension between the adults. Grace seemed happy, maybe happier than she'd been in months. For a few hours, she had both her parents in the same room, pretending to be a family. After dinner, while Grace watched a movie, Ethan and Natalie cleaned dishes in awkward silence. "She's doing well," Natalie said. "Yes, she's resilient." "She gets that from you." Ethan dried a plate with methodical precision. "She gets a lot of good things from you, too." "Like what?" "Her creativity, her empathy, her ability to see the best in people? Even when they don't deserve it?" "Especially then." Natalie was quiet for a moment. "I used to be better than this, before everything went wrong. I remember." "Do you think Grace will remember the good parts? After I'm gone?" "Yes, but she'll remember the truth too, and she'll have to make sense of both." "What will you tell her about me? That you loved her completely, that you made mistakes, that people are complicated. And about us? About our marriage?" Ethan considered the question. What would he tell Grace about her parents' marriage, about love and betrayal, and the way people could destroy the things they claimed to value most? "I'll tell her that we loved each other once, and that sometimes love isn't enough." "Is that what you believe?" "I believe that love without honesty is just elaborate self-deception." Natalie flinched at that, but she didn't argue. That evening, after Natalie had gone home, Grace crawled into Ethan's lap on the couch. "That was nice," she said. "Having everyone together?" "Yes, it was. Will we do it again for Christmas?" Ethan looked down at his daughter's hopeful face and felt his heart break a little. "We'll see, sweetheart." But he knew they wouldn't. Natalie might not live to see Christmas. And even if she did, she'd be too sick for family gatherings. Grace would spend her last Christmas with her mother in a hospital room or hospice facility, surrounded by the medical apparatus that was keeping Natalie alive. It wasn't the ending anyone would have chosen, but it was the ending Natalie's choices had made inevitable. December brought the call Ethan had been expecting. "She's in the hospital," Shannon said. St. Mary's, room 314. What happened? Pneumonia. Her immune system can't fight it off. Ethan found Natalie in a bed connected to oxygen and IV lines, her face pale against the white pillows. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with weight loss. "Where's Grace?" was the first thing she said when she saw him. "At school. I didn't want to scare her. She needs to see me. Before what? Don't make me say it." Ethan sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week if I'm lucky." "Are you in pain?" "Not really. They have good pills here." She tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Will you help me make a recording?" "For Grace? For when she's older?" "What kind of recording?" "The truth. About what happened. About why our marriage ended. I want her to hear it from me. Not just from whatever version of events gets passed down." Ethan stared at her. "You want to confess? To Grace?" "I want to take responsibility, so she doesn't spend her whole life wondering if it was somehow her fault or if you were the villain in the story." "Why now?" "Because I'm dying, and because you were right. Grace deserves the truth." They spent the next hour crafting Natalie's final message to their daughter. She spoke slowly, carefully, choosing her words with the precision of someone who knew they would be permanent. "Grace, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and your father thought you were old enough to understand what really happened between us. I want you to know that our divorce had nothing to do with you. You were the best thing that ever happened to either of us, and every day of your life has been a gift. The truth is that I made some very bad choices. I cheated on your father not once, but many times over several years. I lied to him about where I was going and what I was doing. I brought a disease into our home that made me very sick. Your father tried to save our marriage. He offered to forgive me, to go to counseling, to work things out. But I was too selfish and too ashamed to do the work that would have been required. I want you to know that your father is a good man. He never stopped loving you, even when he stopped loving me. Everything he did, the divorce, the custody arrangement, even his anger, was about protecting you. I hope you can forgive me someday. But more than that, I hope you learn from my mistakes. I hope you choose honesty over convenience, commitment over excitement, love over selfishness. You're going to be an amazing woman, Grace. You already are. And no matter what happens, no matter how much I've messed up, you will always be the thing I'm most proud of in this world." When the recording was finished, Natalie turned off her phone and handed it to Ethan. "Give this to her when she's 18, or when she asks the hard questions, whichever comes first. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure. She deserves to know who her mother really was, not just the sanitized version I want to be remembered as." That afternoon, Ethan brought Grace to the hospital. She held Natalie's hand and chattered about school, about her friends, about the Christmas play she was rehearsing. Natalie listened with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every word, every gesture, every moment. "I love you, baby girl," she said, when visiting hours were over. "I love you too, Mom. See you tomorrow?" "We'll see." But there wouldn't be a tomorrow. Natalie died that night, alone except for the hospital staff who found her in the morning. Grace cried for days. Ethan held her while she sobbed, answered her questions as honestly as he could, and tried to be both mother and father in a world that suddenly felt too big and too empty. The funeral was small. Immediate family, a few friends from school, some of Natalie's colleagues. Shannon spoke about Natalie's devotion to Grace, her creativity, her struggles with depression and self-worth. She didn't mention the affairs or the lies or the disease that had eliminated her. That wasn't a story for public consumption. Ethan spoke last, standing at the podium and looking out at the small gathering of mourners. "Natalie was complicated," he said. "She was capable of great love and great selfishness, sometimes in the same day. She made choices that hurt the people she cared about most. But she also brought Grace into the world, and for that alone I will always be grateful. We're not here to judge her or to canonize her. We're here to acknowledge that she was human, flawed, struggling, trying to find happiness in ways that didn't always work out. Grace asked me yesterday if her mother was in heaven. I told her I didn't know, but that if love was enough to get you there, then Natalie made it. Because whatever else was true about her, she loved our daughter completely." After the service, as people filed out of the chapel, Aunt Marla approached Ethan. "That was very gracious," she said, "considering everything." Grace needed to hear something she could hold on to. You could have destroyed her memory completely, told everyone about the affairs, the disease. What would that accomplish? Marla studied his face. Closure, justice, making sure people knew the truth. The people who need to know the truth already know it. Everyone else can remember Natalie however they want. You've changed, Ethan. You're harder than you used to be. I'm clearer than I used to be. There's a difference. After the burial, Ethan and Grace drove home in silence. She stared out the window at the Minnesota landscape, snow-covered fields stretching toward a gray horizon. Dad? Yeah, sweetheart. Was Mom a bad person? The question hit him like a physical blow. Grace was 11 now, old enough to understand more than she'd been able to process 2 years earlier when this all began. No, he said carefully. Mom made some bad choices, but that doesn't make her a bad person. What kind of bad choices? Adult choices. Things you don't need to worry about right now. But I will need to worry about them someday. Ethan pulled into their driveway and turned off the engine. Through the windshield, he could see their house. Small, tidy, nothing like the colonial they'd shared with Natalie, but home nonetheless. Someday when you're older, I'll tell you everything. The whole truth about Mom, about our marriage, about why things happened the way they did. Will it hurt? Probably. But it will also help you understand who your mother really was. And it will help you make better choices than she did. Grace nodded solemnly. Can we go inside now? I'm cold.